Hello, I'm Ross Stagnitti, and I'm here with Canal Town Commentary, a series of interviews to be archived in the Education Building. And today we have as our special guest Charles Chuck Sgroi. And I was going to say the one and only, but there are two other Charles Sgrois in the phone book. But this Charles Sgroi is a very unique individual. Chuck, thank you for accepting the interview invitation today. You're a Canastota native.
Yes, I am.
Do you care to share with us your date of birth?
Oh, January 28th, 37.
I'll do the quick math. That makes you
77.
Very good, very good. Born where in Canastota?
I was born at the Lennox Memorial Hospital.
Okay, and your parents?
My father was born in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. He came here in 1915. And my mother was born here in Canastota.
Their names?
Louise, she was a Raineri, Louise Raineri.
Okay.
And my father was Sam Sgroi.
All right, very good. And brothers, sisters?
I have one sister, Cynthia. She's married to Marvin Reed. Cynthia Reed is her name.
Okay, and she was my babysitter, by the way.
Yes,
Early
yeah.
50s, because
Yeah.
I lived next door in the D'Amico house.
Yes.
Before we moved to West
You
Louis.
know, I do remember that.
Yeah. Your wife is Ada.
Ada.
Number of children?
And that's 3.
Okay. And,
Two girls and a boy.
okay. And number of grandchildren?
2.
2 grandkids. Now, most of your life has been spent in 2 houses, each with a family history. Early years of your life spent where? What address?
309 New Boston Street.
Okay. And much of your married life spent at what address?
Well, 9 years was spent right on New Boston Street in an apartment that I had rented. And the last 40 years have been at the old Sgroi farm and in the opening road, Tag Road.
Tag Road. Okay, kind of northeast of Canastota.
You're right.
Very good. Now, you had mentioned that your childhood home at 309 New Boston Street was once called the Park House.
The Park House. Basically, there was a park. It was the only house located on that area. And there was just a park around it, and they called it the Park House. And my grandparents, the Raineri family, moved there in early 1900. The house was built in maybe late 1800s.
So that 1885 map that we have many copies of would show one house in that plot of land that was bordered by Park Street on 2 sides, Caroline and New Boston.
Right, yes.
So the Park House, and there was a park there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why did your parents end up at 309 New Boston? What brought them to that location?
Well, when they came from the old country, Sicily, this is where my grandfather happened to locate a house. I mean, I've got all the deeds showing when they relocated there. They're, I don't know where they originated from, either New York City or what, but they came here and settled in a house in the early 1900s. And this was basically 2 of the children were born. The rest were born in the old country. And they also had a little small homestead on the main street, a little summer home. We call them shanties, muck shanties.
Yes.
But then, that was their family home. As far as the history of it, I can't really tell you, how they located there or when the day it was. But
Were your parents ever living in some other location before they moved to 309?
no, not that I'm aware of.
But that was the tradition back then.
Right, right. I've heard stories that my mother was born in another area of the Canastota Mucklands. She was the last of the children. Another muck shanty. Back then, depending on the time of the year you were born, you were born either in the homestead in town or in the country.
Right,
I mean,
right.
they all had midwives, and that's the way things were done back then.
Sure.
We went to the hospital.
Your grandparents, did they live with you? These would be the Raineri grandparents
My
New Boston?
my grandmother, my grandfather died back in the 20s, and so my mother basically was the only one home with my grandmother at the time. The rest were all married off. And my parents married in 32, and being my mother was the youngest of the family, traditionally they're the ones that had to take care of their parents.
The youngest?
Oh yes, the youngest. I always thought it was the oldest, but it was the youngest. And my father, actually just being married, was sort of maybe pressured into taking care of his mother-in-law for 23 years, but he did it. I mean, he had to give up the house that he had rented after my mother and father were married and move in with my grandmother.
Right.
So for 23 years, he supported her. I mean, he lived in her house, but he did the supporting of her,
Sure.
and paid all the bills and stuff like that until her death in '55. So that was the way it was done. I mean, he was approached by the rest of the family to take care of their mother.
Right.
It was her obligation, my mother's obligation, being the youngest, to take care of her mother, because she had no source of income.
Right.
You had the use of the house, but other than that, I mean, the honeymoon was over.
Right. Oh, we're going to cut out here. Okay, you and Ada moved to Tag Road when?
1973.
Okay, and that, as you said, was the old Sgroi farm,
Right,
farm
yes.
home and homestead. How many acres of muck land?
There was 20 acres of muck land.
Okay.
And there was 26 acres on one side of the road and 30 on the other.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Your mom, housewife, and also worked on the muck land.
On the muck land, yes. And poor woman spent most of her life on her hands and knees,
Okay. It
either
reminds
scrubbing floors or working on the muck. I
Right.
mean, she worked very hard.
Now, it reminds me of when I worked on the muck, especially topping onions. It seemed like the women that we were paired up with, they used a knife. We used
Knife,
to use.
that's all we ever used.
Your mom used a
Yeah,
knife to top
right,
onions.
yeah.
We used.
She was very fast too. Yeah, my job was to pick up the onions. She'd miss the crate.
Oh, wow.
Because she'd be so fast, she'd miss the crate, and my job was to pick the onions, put them in the crate.
And they were definitely faster than us
Oh, yeah, she could
young
top
fellas
100
that were
bushel
trying
a
to
day
keep
with no
up.
problem at all.
Your dad, you told me a couple of interesting stories about your dad. He actually worked with Joe Basilio, Carmen's father.
It was his first job after he got married. He, it was the Depression time, and so he had a job with the Johnsons at that stone quarry there on Peterborough
Right.
Street on Route 13. And so he knew Joe Basilio. He'd pick them up, and they would go to the stone quarry, and they would break stones with a sledgehammer. I mean, break them up, throw them in a grinder, crusher, or whatever they call it. And I remember my father said things were so bad that he would always eat by himself. He would be embarrassed to eat with the rest of the crew because he never really had any money, He'd take lettuce and butter sandwiches and sit in a corner and eat those butter and lettuce sandwiches, until Joe Basilio, he used to ride with. He said, "Sam, come over here, sit with me." He says, "Well, I said, I'm all right, Joe." So he said, "What are you eating?" My father was embarrassed. "I got just a sandwich." He said, "What's in it?" And my father said, "Well, butter and lettuce." Oh, Joe Basilio always had food.
Right.
A big family, always had plenty of food. So he gave my father. My father was embarrassed. He said, "Here I am eating this butter and lettuce sandwich. I don't even see me eating butter and lettuce sandwiches on here." And he's doing that kind of labor,
Sure.
So Joe Basilio, they had quite a friendship, but Mr. Basilio was quite a guy.
Interesting. You mentioned your dad obviously worked on the muck land, and there was a story about the number of bushels he stacked one day, and
He stacked, from the time he got early in the morning to late at night, he stacked 1,200 bushel of onions. I never forget. He started one morning and he kept doing it, and finally he was at the end of the lot and he was just finishing up and he was sitting down with his head down. My mother says, "You better go over and check on your father. He's been working hard all day long." They were stacking tens, 10, and went over there, and it must be it just got to him because he was bleeding, through the nose. So it must be the bending over and everything just got to the best of him. But he's a very strong man for his size, But that's the way things were done back then,
Sure.
He just,
I remember
You worked
dragging
very
those
hard.
bushels, and
they weighed freshly cut onions 60 pounds,
Sure.
when they're fully, But between working at the die molding, and he wasn't a very big man, working nights in the molding department, he would they had hand presses then, the way he was explaining it to me. But he didn't have any weight to him, so he'd have to jump up and grab this big arm and pull it down to press the mold because he didn't have no weight to him, And that's the way he did it, and it'd be so hot up there. And I guess he started in 1933 making 25 cents an hour. But he was happy to have the job, you know, because in '33 is when he started working at the die molding.
And that was the die molding that was on South Main Street, which is now, I'm not
Yes,
sure what
yeah.
that building is used for, but
Yeah.
it certainly isn't used for the
Well, he started in
original purpose.
1933. He worked there 41 years.
Okay. Is that a place where many of his friends worked?
Oh, definitely, yes. A lot of the guys, and that's the way it was then, because, you know, he wanted something close to home because he was working the muck land. He was sharecropping for my grandmother, so she'd be able to support herself. And so he'd work the third shift at the die molding. He'd get out at 8 o'clock in the morning, come home, pick us up, and go right down the muck right from there.
Right.
And he worked about 10 o'clock, then he'd go sleep in the car for a couple hours, and then he'd come back out and work the rest of the day, you know. So, I mean, that's the way.
What time did he have to be at work at the die molding?
Probably 11 o'clock at night or something like that. You worked the third shift, you know.
Okay.
You know. Then eventually he just went into the second shift. That's where it benefited me because, you know, because we'd have to leave by 2:30 in the afternoon for him to go home.
So you got to leave the muck land a
You got
little
to leave the
earlier
muck
than
land
the rest.
early, and the rest of them stay. The rest of them had to stay there at 5 o'clock or whatever it was. So we'd always get home 3 o'clock. He'd take a short nap, get cleaned up, and go back to work at the die molding at 4 o'clock. So it benefited
So what
me
did you
a
do
lot.
for the rest of the afternoon?
Well, you know, play. I mean, things you dream about. You daydream most of the time you're down in the mucklands anyway.
There was no
because-
municipal pool over here, right?
No, well, you know, they had a swimming program. If you could make it to the high school, the old Peterborough Street School.
Oh, there's a bus that took
There was a bus who
down
would
to
take you
Verona.
down to Verona Beach. But you had to be pretty quick. See, it depends on how fast my father drove home. I'd wash in the muck ditch or get some of the muck off my eyes. Then I'd have my bathing suit in the car. He'd pull in the driveway, I'd jump out of the car and I'd run from New Boston Street to the Peterborough Street School. And sometimes I wouldn't miss the bus, I'll be honest with you. But most of the time I would get the bus as it was pulling out. 3 o'clock, they would take you to Verona Beach and you have an hour swim. And then I'd be embarrassed because I'd be so dirty, you know, because the muck was in your eyes and your ears. I'd sit in the back of the bus and I had a pair of old trunks that my dad had up in the attic where the old woolen trunks, they had little moth holes in them. So I didn't want to be embarrassed, so I'd go and change and I'd run in the water and I'd stay there until then I'd get in the sand and rub all over so nobody could see the moth hole. You know, right, I mean, but that was the times.
Well,
it was simple times.
yeah.
And
So you went from the Black Beach to Verona Beach.
oh, Black Beach, that's another story. Yeah, Black Beach. You know, that's a famous quote. You know, I bring it back. You know, if the weeds got ahead of you, no, actually it was just usually a 5-day deal. But if you got ahead of you Sunday mornings, half a day, no more than half a day. You know, and I remember getting up. I wanted to go down the beach. You know, I never heard of Black Beach before. You know, my father says, I said, Dad, we're going to go to the beach today. Yes, it looks like a good day. So maybe we'll get to the beach. And all of a sudden I get all excited. All of a sudden I see you come down in his work clothes, you know, and Dad, I said, I thought you probably were going to take us to the beach. Yeah, he said, we're going to go to Black Beach. Half a day, Black Beach, then we'll come home. Oh, yeah, really, and that's, you know, that's where I learned about Black Beach.
Yeah.
Black Beach, and that's the way it was done, because the weeds got ahead of you, you know, you had to get down there and work on them, you know, so, but he was pretty good about that. I mean, he didn't push it too hard, you know, you figure half a day would be plenty on a Sunday, you know, I mean, because you'd hit 3 or 4 rainy days during the week, you had plenty of time off to do what you wanted to do.
When did he finish muck farming? What year was it?
1955. It was March 25th, 1955. We were planting our onions.
You were a senior in high school.
I was a senior in high school, and I remember my dad, we were raising 2.5 acres of muck, and we were filling the set planter, and he says, you know, if we make out pretty good this year, he says, I got that next lot next door. He says, we'll put in half of it for you. And he says, whatever you get out of it, it'll be yours. I said, Dad, I says, after I draw the last load of onions out of this lot this fall, I said, you'll never see me down here again. I said, I'm graduating. I'm either going to go to school or go get a job, whatever. I'll never be down here again. And the poor guy, he looks at me, he's smoking a pipe, and he says, well, if you don't want to come down, I don't want to come down. He says, that was it. And that was the last year we ever raised onions. And I never went back down there, even to hunt, even to see what was going on down there. The last load of onions I took out of that lot, I looked back, got out of the truck and looked back, and I said, never again. I made a gesture, which I can't. But, and I drove out of that lot, and I never did go back. You know, I never went back there. And I said, my life has been here. Oh, you know, I was only 18, but since I was a little kid, those boring, hot, long days in the onions, and you know, you just look. You know, half the time you're daydreaming about, you know, why couldn't my parents have a camp on a night of lake instead of shanty down the muck? You know, but that was the times, and you accepted it. Exactly. You know, you never questioned it. You know, you knew what was going on around you. And everybody was in the same boat there. You look around to the right or the left, your neighbors were in the same. We were all on the same level. Where we grew up on the north side, we were on the same level. We all had part-time jobs. You either worked on a railroad, in factories, and you did this on the side to make some extra money. You had the muck land there. You were paying the taxes on it, so you had to support it, you know. So.
And your father continued working at die molding for a number of years thereafter?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Until he got, I think he's 74, I think he got out of there. 74.
So he had over 40 years.
41 years.
What kind of a pension did he get from die molding?
At that time, he gave him $2 a year, so he had an $82 pension. That was his pension after 41 years in die molding. Yeah. No, he always, you know. But you know, it was good for him because it was close to home. He was able to handle the muck land and everything else. But you know, he made ends meet. I don't know how they did it. I really don't. We never did without. You know, if you had a good year on
the same for my grandparents and you know parents.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't know. Maybe things are different today. We're just too greedy, I guess, a while because. You know, back then, if my mother bought a chair, it had to last her 30 years.
Oh, sure.
You bought carpeting, you didn't walk in on it unless with your shoes either. I mean, you know, she'd be down there scrubbing everything, you know. So everything would be high quality, but it would last her a long time, you know. I mean, never misused. Never misused.
You spent your school days in Canastota.
Yes.
Started where? Which building? Which street?
Oh, schooling?
Yeah.
Oh, Chapel Street School, Spencer Street School, you know.
Okay.
Until 49.
Right.
That's when we got burned out.
Okay. You were in the building when?
I was in the building. I was in 6th grade, Mrs. Jones' class. Then we got burned out in March of 49.
Everybody got out safely?
Everybody got out, yeah, but I didn't have enough getting out the first time. I had to go in for a second shot.
You went back into a burning building?
Back into a burning building.
Was your girlfriend in there? Or?
No. That Christmas I had gotten one of those sheepskin coats, you know. I mean,
oh, yeah.
I'm top of the line, you know. And I know my parents struggled to get it for me. And so Pearl Bush, the teacher at the time, was going through the hallway, clean up the classrooms, get them out, screaming and hollering, get them all out. We all went on the west side of the parking lot, and we're waiting. You know, I mean, where the smoke's coming out the windows, and I happen to think, I said, gee, my coat's in there. I'll never get another one. So I broke ranks, and I went into,
but it isn't.
I went in the building. I was the only one that went. I went back into the building. It was, and actually the building was right facing the parking lot, so I mean, you didn't have to go upstairs or anything. And I went right in there, and Pearl Bush right on my tail. And I went right into the cloakroom, picked up my coat. He says, "Get out! Can't you see the building?" I said, "I'm not going to leave my coat here. I'll never get another one." So I did save my coat.
So did your parents ever find out?
No, I never told them about that.
Of course, you were probably thinking you were a hero, grabbing the coat.
Oh, I saved the coat. Yeah, saved the coat. I'll never get another one. Yeah.
Mercy.
Yeah.
After the fire, then you had to go somewhere temporarily.
For the remainder of that year, we went into, which is the Methodist Church, but it's a Greystone.
Oh, yeah.
Greystone. Sixth grade, I finished the year there, and then 1950, I went into high school. It was a little crowded, but we made it into.
Was junior high there as well?
Junior high and high.
In high school. Yeah. My class was the last to graduate, 10 years after yours.
Really?
Yeah, I was 65. You brought your yearbook.
Yes.
The Toot.
Toot.
Still called the Toot after all these years.
Yeah, the Toot.
And you mentioned that you designed.
I designed the cover and the sports page.
We need to take a good look at that.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah. I was going through here and picking out the number of my classmates that are deceased now, and there's been quite a few. As I say, these years, we're talking almost 60 years now.
Yeah.
Next year will be our 60th. So I guess we're pretty lucky, considering everything, you know.
Who is still in the area that graduated in 55?
Oh, Rocky DeBronica,
Okay.
Gilbert Tornator.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and there's a few of the girls, Sandy Palomaro, Gloria Houseman, Marianne Mengusi. Yeah,
sure.
there's a bunch of us yet around here too. You know.
Any teachers that were
No teachers that I
more
know of.
memorable than others?
Oh, well, Miss Farrell, I mean, she was our class advisor.
I had many of the teachers that you had. They were
Yeah.
kind of getting to the end of the line.
You know, well, there was Mike Tornator. I got a kick out of him. But Florence Farrell was my favorite. You know, she was
the
a wonderful
favorite of
person.
many.
Wonderful person, I tell you. Even, I think she enjoyed her pupils progressing. I don't care how small it was.
Right.
You know, Rocky was into politics, and some guys did a lot better than others, you know, professionally. Even though I was a letter carrier, she was happy that I was a letter carrier. I mean, she was proud. At least I took a civil service test and became a civil servant.
Absolutely.
Yeah, she thought, well, maybe I did accomplish something with this guy after all, because I wasn't the easiest.
Well, it was a civil service test. I mean,
Oh, definitely,
I mean,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
people sometimes they kind of poo-poo some jobs. That was a service to the community.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
I mean, you know, some people, it may have been more rich and famous, may not have been providing the service that you did for many years. After high school, 55, what jobs did you have prior
I worked all kinds
your
of
marriage?
jobs. I worked 3 years at GE. Then I did some construction work. Then I felt it was time that Uncle Sam was going to call me.
More service.
So more service. I volunteered for the draft. They called me.
What year was that?
1960, election year. You know, Kennedy was elected.
Sure.
I
Had you left town before Kennedy was downtown here? I shook his hand.
yeah. Well, I left November 9th, which I think was election day.
He was here before
Was
that.
he?
Sure.
And I volunteered. I tried to get my good buddy Louis DeBalso to, we graduated together. We traveled to Florida together. We did a lot of traveling together. Tried to get him to go into service with me. And he got very angry with me. Words were said. So I said, I'm going to go down and volunteer. So I went to Oneida and I signed up. And so I come back, he was at Finn's gas station. He had a great job. He was working on construction, making big money, bought a nice car, Cadillac. And I says, Louis, I said, I got to make a confession. I says, when they gave me my induction paper to sign, you know, I says, I put your name on the second one. They gave me 2 of them by mistake. I said, I put yours on the second one. And he believed me. And he chased me through Finn's garage, threw pails at me and everything else. And I laughed. You know, I didn't see him for about a month, you know, because I knew he was angry with me. And so I was working on construction. I came home from construction, and my father says, oh, Louis DeBoss is looking for you. I said, why? And was he like, you still mad? I said, I was just kidding. And, you know, I'm kidding. He said, he got his draft notice today. He said, by the way, he says, you got yours too. And I still believe he thought I really, because I knew his birth date and everything, and signed his name, you know, that I did that. So we went into service together. But that was quite a story. I'm telling you, the day he got so angry with me that he threw pails at me and everything else through Finn's gas station. And I was laughing. And I said, I'm just kidding you a little bit. Sure enough, a month later, we both got our draft notices. We went in together.
Wow. It was during your Army stint you met your wife?
Yes, I was stationed at Fort Hood, Texas at the time, and I was driving for one of the officers, and she worked upstairs in G3 section, and we occasionally met down in the rec room, and started dating, and the rest is history.
What year were you married? What year were you married?
62.
62, so it's married 52 years. Congratulations.
Yeah, 52 years.
Yeah, well done. Yeah. Now, your longest career was with the U.S. Postal Service. Yeah. What got you interested in the Postal Service? Why would you want to take the civil service test?
Well, when I worked at the state agriculture department for a while. I was doing on a surveying crew, but that was just short-termed. So then I finally located a job in Syracuse working on construction, pick and shovel man, you know. which was good money at the time. But I kept thinking she was expecting, and what are we going to do here? I said, I have to need something more than this. So that's when I thought I'd, get a postal job.
Sure.
So I took the civil service test. And within a few months, they called me in. I started out at $2.05 an hour. I left an $8 hour job in the Syracuse area to take a $2.05 job at the post office. But I felt the security was there,
Sure.
and I liked the job. I mean, I got outside, I met people, I enjoyed I felt free, and I enjoyed it. But it was 9 years before I got a regular job. Mm-hmm. And after that, then I was all set.
How many years?
28.
28 years.
28, plus I had 3 years of other service time and stuff like that.
And you mentioned something about
leave.
when you did decide to retire in 92?
92.
That was kind of
Well, things were a little touchy around the post office. There were a lot of shootings going on, not in this area, but you heard
Mm-hmm.
about it. Everybody was going postal. And actually it was coming down the ranks, and it was coming down on me for some reason I couldn't understand. So I said, I've had enough. I was 55, I had my years in, I had with my service time and accumulated sick leave, I had over 31 years in. So I said, it's time to leave. So I contacted my wife. She was working for the Army Reserve Unit in Syracuse, in Liverpool. And I said, meet me at Taft Road. And I said, I'm going to retire. I said, I've had it.
Wow.
So she said, all right. So she meets me down there. She's sitting in the office and like with her. And the woman comes out. She gives me the forms to sign. And I said, I got one more form for you to sign, and we'll get you on your way, get everything processed for you, Chuck. I said, okay. I said, I got to use a men's room. It was right across the hallway, so I'll go in there, and I met one of the inspectors who used to come down here and inspect me on the roof. And I got along great with him, And he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to retire. I said, why? I said, I've had it. I said, I've had it with the post office. I said, yeah, after all the years I put in, I've got over 2,200 hours of sick leave accumulated, and everything when I was sick, I said, they're just making tough things difficult for me, and I'm just discouraged. He said, can't you wait a couple months? I said, why? What's going to happen in a couple months? He said, they're going to buy you out in August. I'll buy me out. And then meanwhile, another guy comes in, he says, you ever heard such stuff? Yeah, that's what I heard it is, but nothing's been set yet. He says, can't you wait 2 months and see what's going on? Yeah, I can wait 2 months. So I went back in the office, Diane's there, and she says, sure, Chuck, sign this paper. I said, the more I think about it, I said, I think I got cold feet. I said, I said, meanwhile, my wife's there, her mouth drops. She says, you made me get out of work, come down here, now you don't want to retire? I said, I'll explain it to you later. So she said, I'll leave it up to you. She said, once you sign, you're done. We'll get the paperwork processed for you. So I come back to the post office, I tell them the rest of the guys, I said, you retired, did you? I said, no. I said, I'm going to wait 2 months. Meanwhile, I'm talking to Freddie Myers and John Otts and the postmaster. They all got their time in. I said, they're going to buy us out in August, supposedly. So we'll just have to wait and see. Sure enough, August comes around and they buy us out for 50%. And, the wages weren't the greatest at the time, but they were all right. So, it's always been the story around the post office that
Yes.
I took the $16,000
Potty break.
Potty break.
Who can argue with that?
And really, it worked out. In August, they came through and they bought me out for $16,000. Otherwise, I would have just left that behind, signed the papers, and it would have been all done.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to mention a familiar phrase. Neither rain, sleet, nor gloom of night will stay the carrier from his appointed rounds. I guess we have to add her appointed rounds now as well. But there's no mention of dogs in there.
Dogs.
Were you ever bitten by dogs? That's what I always
I hold a record of
to
being bitten a
post.
number of times in the Canastota Post Office. I doubt if anybody's been bitten as many times as I have. I've had some real doozies, I'll tell you.
Any that stand out that were...
Well, yes. I'm not going to mention names, but there was a prominent lawyer in town.
Oh, God.
And he had a Springer Spaniel, and the dog hated me for some reason, I guess. So one Saturday, I'm delivering mail to this lawyer's house, and he's outside raking, and he's got the dog tied to his belt. I says, your dog doesn't like me. He's going to bite. He's giving me a hard time for a long time. Oh, he's tied to my belt. Don't worry about it. I got him under control. I said, are you sure? Can't you see right here, he says. So I go and hand the guy the mail, and he let me have it, the dog did. And let me tell you, it was close. So, meanwhile, being a lawyer, his eyes got real big. He says, gee, did he get you? And meanwhile, brand new pair of pants, I just put them on, postal pants, and I could feel it was getting moist. I said, yeah, he got me good. So he's coming to the house, He got the dog, he ties the dog up to the tree, and he's getting in the house. And meanwhile, he's getting a little concerned now. He says, I'm in his living room. His wife is there. And she says, what happened? I said, he bit me. He says, where? And I says, right here, right in my leg. Inner part of my leg. She says, well, let me get some peroxide. She says, we'll get it. He said, take your pants off. He said, we'll get a peroxide. But I did, because I was concerned myself. So and then she puts a peroxide, and she puts a bandage on, and then he said, well, we can't let her go there. He says, let me take you to the hospital. We'll get you a shot and get you, I says.
Maybe we can settle this out of court.
I said, don't worry about it. I said, I'm okay. I said, she put peroxide, she put a bandage in, it was a relief to him, because
Sure.
I've done business with him. My father's done business. He's a family friend.
Right.
But he felt bad that this happened. Can you imagine just going to somebody's living room, dropping your pants, and you've got your leg up on their sofa, and she's pouring peroxide on it.
Did you ever use mace to protect yourself?
Mace? Yes, a couple of times. I've always carried it with me, but I never had much luck with it. One time I used it on a dog, and the people see me use it on a dog, and they got very, very, very angry with me, to the point I thought it was going to get physical. I mean, the dog had me up against a telephone pole. And finally I had to let the dog have it, and she happened to see me do it, and she got very upset. Another time there was a boxer up on Stroud Street. The dog, I think, basically was be harmless, but he was such a nuisance, so I was going to teach it a lesson one day. So I had the mace out, and I could see the boxer come up to me. And being on the south side, it's opened up pretty good, so it's always pretty breezy. But it was more breezy that day. It was a little windy, and I sprayed the dog. I got the dog, but the wind kicked the spray back into my face.
You maced yourself.
I maced myself. I'm sitting up on the corner of Stroud and the loop up there. And Belleville. Sitting on the lawn there, Frank Collier's lawn, and both of us, the dog is wiping his eyes, and I'm sitting next to the dog, and I'm wiping my eyes. I mean, what a picture that was.
Oh my goodness.
The dog, the dog and I both got maced at that time. The dog never bothered me after that. Never had a
I
problem.
can see the headline at the newspaper. A macing story.
Oh, I had.
Ever get chased by dogs? Where you didn't get bit, but I mean, they had you on the run?
No. I think the best one would be where Dickie Veronica lives. A classmate of mine lived there, Lyle Nisker, so that's his homestead. Well, Eileen, his wife, was a classmate, or she graduated with me, and I was delivering mail to, I think it was Marl Griggle lived next door, and they had a German Shepherd, and I put the mail in the box. I must have startled the dog when I turned, and the dog bit me right in the rump. Hard. I got mad. I dropped my mail bag, I picked up a stick.
You went after it.
I went after the dog, and I'm chasing the dog around Lyle Nisker's house a couple of times. Meanwhile, Eileen's at the kitchen sink doing dishes. She sees me go by the house. And she, heck? So she comes out and she says, "What, Chuck, what's the matter?" I said, "Your dog just bit me." I said, "What's the matter with this dog?" And, she says, "Where?" She says, I said, "Never mind." He said, "Well, let me come in and take a look at it." He says, I said, "Forget it." I said, "I don't think he broke the skin." I said, "But he let me have it good." I said, "It was black and blue right on my cheek of my, what." But that was comical. But her to see me running by with that stick over my head, I was going to clap the dog.
That used to be a nursing home at one time.
Used to be a nursing home,
Dickie
yeah.
Dronica's mentioned that a few times.
Yeah.
Now, being a postman for all those years, letter carrier, 28 years, can you remember the street address?
407 North Main.
407 North Main
North
Street.
Main, yeah.
Okay. I've always said that letter carriers are among the most knowledgeable people of neighborhoods. I mean, who knows neighborhoods better than somebody that's there 5, 6 times a week?
You walked the same route for 20 some odd years, and you're bound to remember something.
I'm going to put you on the spot. This
geez.
is an old directory from 1970. They did these for many, many years. And the cool thing was they would have streets listed with the residents, in succession, numbers and whatever. I'll make it your choice. Give me a street and then rattle off the people that some of these may have changed from 67 to 73 or whatever, but yeah, I would imagine that like Main Street.
Yeah. Well, give me a name.
Let's see if I can find. There's Mechanic. Put my glasses on. I can't see. We mentioned Main Street earlier, so here's There's Main Street. Here we go. North Main Street. Okay, North Main Street. Let's take a neighborhood I'm familiar with. So we'll start at the corner of Lewis and Main and Louis Finicaro.
Yeah.
Okay, who else lived on that stretch of North Main Street?
Going which way?
Either way.
Going north. Well, where you want to start, there was Rankins at 302. Right. One of the Brovies lives there at 304, and then Dick Brophy lived at 306.
Yeah.
All right. Billy Backus lived at 308.
And my grandmother was there before, but you're right. Harold Backus, Billy Backus was there in 1970.
Right. Ponticello at 312, Fiume's at 314, Marsal at 316, Mancini and DiVincenzo at 318, Shepard at 320. It used to be Valeri.
Louis Valeri.
All right, and Bob Foster, and then Cole lives on the corner.
I'm convinced. Yeah. Impressive. And Chuck, there's another thing I associate you with, several other things we'll get to. Cars and trucks.
Oh, cars.
And you told me earlier about a story from your childhood. You were fascinated with this fella's new fancy car.
Oh.
And
yes, well,
you went for a ride apparently.
Yeah, well, my neighbor had a garage. He repaired and sold tractors in Joe Fafaya. And I was in the garden, which bordered his garage. And I was fascinated by old cars. Even as a kid, I'd always be drawing them. I was just fascinated with. And I was in the garden one day, and this guy pulls in with this very shiny old car, blue. I never forget it was blue. It was a little coupe. And I got on the running board, and I'm looking in the window, and it's all blue velvet interior. I mean, it was just beautiful. I mean, the car was nice, It was an old Buick, 25 Buick Opera Coupe. And I had to be very young, 6, 7, 8 years old, very young. And so this guy comes out of the garage, and he says, "Hi, you like my car?" I said, "Gee, this car is pretty." I says, "Look at the interior, look at the inside, and how nice it is." He says, "Well, Mike, you just put yourself in a situation like this, I mean, as a parent." He said, "Well," he said, "I got to go over Gott's Chevrolet and get," he was selling advertising stuff, rulers, pencils, whatever. He said, "I got to go over and get an order from him." He said, "I'll bring it right back." "Gee, you want to ride over with me?" I said, "Gee, that'd be great."
Complete stranger.
Complete stranger, never saw him before in my life. He opens the door, and I get in the back seat, and I remember the seat was oval. A rounded seat in the back, and I sat in the seat right by the window, And he goes down Park Street and down New Boston Street, and who happened to be in the front yard picking up something, or she was right by the sidewalk, right by the sidewalk. She sees this car come down. It attracted her, an old car. And it goes by. Here I am in the back window. There's a little small window, the quarter window, and I'm waving to her like this here. And she's
your mother?
My mother. And she, poor woman, she went. She started to panic. She said,
She couldn't call 911 back then.
She couldn't 911. She didn't know who this car was, where I was going. I'm just waving at her as I'm going by the house. Meanwhile, and the guy went over to Gussie Gott's. I'm sitting in the back of the seat, and sure enough, he brought me back to Joe Fafaya, dropped me off. Boy, what a spanking I got when I got home. I mean, and then you can imagine, I deserved it. Well, I didn't know any better, I liked the old car, and the guy was willing to give me a ride. Sure. Why not? I mean, that's it. Cars have always been my.
You told me you had a 29 Model A.
29 Model A. I was delivering newspapers, and this guy had this Model A truck beside his house on Park Street, right in my neighborhood. And I remember belonging to my neighbor years ago, before that, and years before that, and remember I got pictures home of it. And I says, yeah, I says, I wonder if he wants to sell that truck. I'd like to buy that truck. I was 15 years old then. So I approached the guy. He said, yeah, he sells out there. He says, what are you going to use it for? I said, well, I want an old truck. He said, man, we use it on a muck lane. I said, how much you going to have for it? You know, Felix Montalbano owned a truck at that time. He said, well, $25. So I saved up my money from the newspapers and stuff, and I paid him the $25, right? And I go over to the house, he's there, I paid him the $25, and he said, well, the truck's yours whenever you want it. He says, he gave me a little receipt, and I put it in the truck, and all of a sudden I get in the truck. He said, well, where do you think you're going?
So you didn't have a license?
No license on the truck, no nothing.
No registration.
No. He said, where do you think you're going? It's not my truck now, isn't it? I paid you for it. Yeah. I said, well, I'm going to take it home. He says, you don't have a license. So? There's no license on the truck. So? I said, I only got to go around the corner, and who's going to stop me? And I drove the truck home. I drove the truck home. But my pop pulled the driver apart. I said, where'd you get this? I said, just bought a truck. 15 years old.
So did you continue to drive it around town?
We
even though you didn't have a
used
license?
that from 1952 to 1958. We used it on the mucklands, and then I got a job as working in a garage where Drex used to be here on Route 5, Atlantic Station. I had a part-time job there night, so and the guy needed a service truck, so I took the old Model A and I painted it red and put Atlantic signs on the door, and we made a service truck out of it. Wow. I don't know whatever happened to it after that.
So Model A, but you became a Chevy guy.
Oh, definitely.
And I think you have a picture of your pride and joy. Is it this picture right here?
Yeah.
It's a...
That's a 34 Chevrolet that my dad bought brand new in 1934 when things were pretty tough. And
that looks like it was in your driveway, because I recognize the house across the street is...
It was in my driveway. That picture was taken probably on 53, about 53, because I had my license then. And as a kid, I remember him, how he shifted it and everything. He never really taught me how to drive it. I was 8, 10 years old. And that's all the only vehicle we had. We had an old muck truck, but he got rid of it during the war. But that's all. It would use for pleasure and work. And I remember one time coming home, and my father said, well, I think we'll go down to the beach tomorrow. He says, I want you to go out and clean the car out. I was just a little kid.
Which beach?
Well, it was a regular beach,
Okay.
Corona Beach.
Okay.
So I went in there with the broom, I go out and I'm trying to sweep the car out with a broom, right? So what do? I stick the broomstick through the roof of the car.
It was like a fabric.
Fabric top,
Yeah.
and I go, boom. My father he patched it up. But we used that car from 1934, and then I remember being down on Muck Lane, I learned how to drive it by myself. And I remember we lived way off the beaten track of Main Street, way down the back, so we had quite a run to get up to the main road. And so we'd bring water with us during the day, to drink. But if we ran out of water, we had to get more water, so we'd go up to Main Street, and the farmhouse is still there, just near the farm that we were raising. So he'd let me use the car. I couldn't even see over the steering wheel. And I'd go up to the main road, then I'd go to Donato's and get a gallon of water, but I spilt more water just so I could drive that car up to the road to get more water. He knew what I was up to, but he never said anything. So as we went on, I says, I got older, I says, well, I was 11 years old. He was going to buy a new car, 1948 Chevrolet, and I said, well, you're going to give me the old car, the 34 Chevrolet. He said, yes, you can have it. He said,
This car was 14 years old.
14 years old then, pretty well whipped, And so he says, yeah, you can have it. So I come home from school. I knew he was getting a new car. I come in there, and neither, car was in the yard, both 34 and 48. He was working nights at the time, and I realized where that was. Well, where's my 34 Chevrolet? And my mother said, well, Gussie offered him some money on trade towards the 48, so Dad could help to needed the help on the car, so he let him have it for a trade. Well, that upset me. And I says, so I went up to Gussie Gott's, and sure enough, the car's in the lot.
No, I remember Gott's.
Or your
That's
Main
where
Street-
Bertucci was, and now it's an auto parts store
Vantage Auto.
next to the railroad.
Right.
Okay.
Here's the car in the parking lot with the for sale sign on it, $225.
And what was the trade? How much did he get credit?
Well, I wasn't aware of it at the time. And so I got over there and I see the car and it upset me, and I got in the car and I locked the doors. And Gussie Gott comes out and he says, what are you doing in the car? I said, my father promised me this car. You can't sell this car. He said, what do you mean I can't sell this car? He says, you know, you got to get out of the car. He said, I can't leave you here all night. I said, I'll stay here all night. I said, I locked the doors. I wouldn't even lock the door for him or nothing. I stayed there, I cracked the window down a little bit. So meanwhile, he calls to my father at Dimone. He's working the second shift at Dimone. He says, Sam, he says, you got to come down and get this kid out of this car. I can't leave him here all night. You know, so my father comes down there and he says, Chuck, what's the problem? I said, you promised me this car. Remember that? Well, he says, he gave me a $125 trade-in, which is pretty good money towards the 48. He says, so, you know, it helped me out a little bit. And I said, Dad, you promised me this is my car. And he looks at Gussie Gott, and Gussie Gott says, hey, Sam, business is business. He says, well, what's it going to cost me, Gus, to get this car back? He says, yeah, I can't leave him here, too. You know, I mean, he's my son. I got to bring him home. He says, $225. My father says, so forget about the trade-in. And it cost him $100 more, which was a lot of money back in 1948.
Right.
But I've got the receipt right here.
This is the receipt from
This is the receipt my father, before he passed away, he says, I want you to take this little box, metal box, a little metal box, and someday when you got plenty of time and you think about things, he says, I want you to sit down and look through these receipts. Here's a receipt dated November 19th, 1948. Sold to Samuel Sgroi, 1934 Chevrolet, $224. $25, I'm sorry. $225. And this is where Gussie Gott signed it. So he only lost the trade-in, plus it cost him an extra $100 to get the car back. Now that was 1948. I didn't get my license until 1953. But
so this receipt was your father's way of saying, you'll never forget
you'll
this
never
story."
forget.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, got Chevrolet, 212, 214 South Main Street. Yeah, that was always a big deal. When the new cars came out at Gott's, we used to hop on our bikes and race over there. They'd give out balloons and bubble
big
gum
deal.
or
We had a
whatever.
little small showroom.
Yeah.
Just show one car, but oh yeah, that was an interesting story. But I got my car. It was my first car in 1953.
Stuck to your guns.
I stuck to my guns, and we drove that car for a number of years later. We sold the car 24 years after it was bought. 24 years we kept that car. 24 years.
So, letter carrier, car aficionado, but also Chuck Sgroi is one of Boxing Hall of Fame's founding fathers.
Oh, I'm proud of that. You know, because
right here in the book.
Really, I'm, you know, it took a lot to put it together, and let me tell you, a lot of right people got in there at the right time and did it.
Yeah.
I mean, anybody can suggest something. I just suggested it. The rest of the people did the work. I'll be honest with you, you know.
But there's some background to this. Boxing was part of your life. You told me about a boxing ring, some makeshift boxing ring.
Well,
that you
matter of
put
fact,
together.
if we had a dispute in the neighborhood or in school, I still have my boxing gloves back then. We would go on the canal bank, and we'd get a piece of rope and 4 stakes and make a makeshift ring, a couple onion crates. That would be our stools, and we would battle it out on the canal bank. I mean, yeah, after school, and that was it.
And that was the Basilio neighborhood down that way. My
up
father
right.
lived on State Street for a while, and Carmen used to talk about playing football on the canal bank when he was a kid.
Yeah, it was right there. It was a little small area, but I remember this. We used to put up makeshift rings, and I remember some of the guys used to have a problem in school, and they said, well, we'll meet you at the canal bank, and we'd go up there, and we'd sit you know, and I always liked boxing. My dad got me my first boxing gloves when I was about 10 years old, and I still got them today. I've got everything I had. I never threw any away.
Hey, that's all right.
All right, you know,
they come in handy, especially when we're in an interview.
I'm looking over here. I got a little baby picture. I had to be maybe a year old with a teddy bear. See
That's
that?
you?
Yeah, that's with a teddy bear. See that teddy bear?
Oh, yeah.
My grandfather got me that when I was about 2 years old. I still have my teddy bear.
No kidding.
Don't think of me weird.
Oh.
I still have it has no hair or no eyes, but I still have my teddy bear, and it's still in my bed.
We kept one of our son, the other two made sure we got rid of stuff, but we kept some things from the youngest
I
to
still got
show
my-
his kids.
I still
now,
got my
yeah.
teddy bear. I tell guys that, they said, "Man, you're weird."
But boxing was in the family bloodlines because
Yeah, my
your
cousin.
dad's first cousin was Benny
yeah,
Sgroi, and he was a
Sgroi,
champion,
you know, he's a
collegiate champion.
Collegiate
at
champion in
Syracuse
Syracuse University. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, boxing's always been a big thing with not so much my side of the family, my dad's side, but the other Sgrois.
Right.
They were into boxing.
And we grew up with a radio at first, a radio
Yeah,
broadcast,
yeah.
and you told me about a famous ring announcer who you wouldn't be able to pick out of
Well,
a lineup, but
yeah.
you recognized his voice, and he was in Canastota.
I was
one time.
working at a garage part-time nights down near the thruway. It's gone now, but and this guy pulls in and he orders some gas and he comes in to pay and he's striking up a conversation with me and I'm listening to him. I says, I said, you sound very familiar to me. I said, you don't look familiar, but I said, you sound familiar to me. I says, he says, well, do you ever watch the Friday night fights? Yeah, Gillette. Friday night. I said, oh yeah, all the time. He says, well, my name is Don Dumpy. And that's how I got to meet Don Dumpy. And
Who would later be inducted in the Boxing Hall
later
of Fame.
inducted in the Boxing Hall of Fame. But that was back in the 50s.
Very distinctive voice.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
But I picked up on it just as he was talking to me. He was striking up a little conversation. He was traveling through, And the more he talked, I said, well, you sound familiar to me. I said, you didn't want to sound a little weird, And he told me who he was, Don Dumpy. Yeah. That was neat, it was neat,
And then by the late 40s and 50s, TV was becoming quite popular.
Yeah,
and
TV, it was pretty scarce. And late 40s, say 48, 49.
Where'd you watch your first TV program?
Mrs. Emmy had a TV.
That would be across the street
Across the
from where
street
you
from
lived
me
down
up there.
in
She was a
Boston.
wonderful woman. We'd go after school and watch Howdy Doody. Or there'd be
I remember Howdy
maybe
Doody.
a Western on or something like that. And she would have little goodies for me. We'd go upstairs, and then I'd sit on the floor and watch TV. And then after it was all over, we'd all went home. Right after school, we were such a nuisance, but she accepted it. We went up there and just sat on the, we were complete strangers. I mean, we were kids in the neighborhood, but there was none of her grandchildren or anything. We all went upstairs and just made ourselves at home.
Remember the first TV set you had in your own house?
Yes, that was 1950 Labor Day. I still got the receipts of that too, because my father.
Was it a Motorola? That was the first one?
No, that was GE.
It was
It was GE, a
Okay.
fancy console model with the doors on it. It was Labor Day in 1950, and Nancy Baldussi would display a TV. He'd set it all up, and he'd set some chairs up. It was a
And he had the store right
store
here
here in
on
town, Canastota
Peterborough.
Hardware. It was a promotional deal, you could sell a TV and make his day, So we go up there and we watched the races. My father liked to watch the races. We all watched the races, and I really got, I see this TV and it had a 12-inch screen on it. It was
What kind
beautiful.
of races? Auto or horse?
Auto races. And then, Nancy would make a pitch on the TV, but geez, the price was $325 or $375. I know I got the receipts home,
Oh, that's a lot of money back
a lot of
then.
money back in 1950, so I walked down and I said, gee, Dad, boy, that's a nice TV, isn't it? He said, yeah, it's nice, but it's expensive, Sam. My God, he says, that's $300 worth. Well, he must have saw the look on my face, my jaw dropped. I said, gee, we're going to walk with no TV after all. We went through to listen to his promotion and watching TV. I didn't know I could get to my father, but he liked it too. Don't get me wrong,
Okay, you played off each other.
No, anybody else, heck with it, I won't buy no TV. He says, all right, send the car. He said, I'll be right back. He goes in and he talks to Nancy Baldussi and makes some arrangements on paying for me. So I said, well, how'd you make out? I said, we still got to come up with figure how we're going to finance this thing. I says, we'll go home and think about it. So we'll go home and think about it. Sure enough, about an hour later, Nancy Baldussi pulls in with that TV on the back of his truck. And he came through, and we had that TV for years. And as I say, that's one of the receipts there. It's in the box. Because I talked to him about the TV. I mean, he could have probably bought another TV for probably $100 less if it had a little simple table model, but I wanted this fancy model, 12-inch, you know. Yeah.
And back then, the merchants would carry you. I mean, they
carry
there were
you.
no credit cards back then.
No,
obviously.
they just carry you.
And I mean, the druggist, you know, if you had, you know, some prescriptions that were, yeah.
It was interesting.
Wow. Well, let's get back to the Boxing Hall of Fame. This whole concept of a Hall of Fame really started with a showcase, and it came on the heels of a 1982 Mike Milmo column. He was reminiscing about Carmen Basilio defeating Sugar Ray Robinson in 1957, so it was the 25th anniversary. And apparently there were a couple of gentlemen that had the idea of, well, we should do something for Carmen.
Yeah.
And they were, who were those?
It originated with Joe Bonaventura and Farrell Miller.
Okay.
They were talking at the American Legion one night that they should do something for Carmen. And so they said, well, we'll put a notice in the paper, see if we can get some volunteers, somebody to, you know, to work this out. My wife happened to spot it, and she says, you know, you always like boxing. Why don't you get involved and do something for Carmen? So that was so they all met that first night. I wasn't there. So then it come out, they were looking for more volunteers, and my wife said, well, why don't you volunteer? So I happened to be at the White House and pick up my daughter from work, and Eddie Brophy was sitting in the office at Brunauti, I think at the time it was.
That's right.
So I knocked on the door, and I knew he was into boxing, much more than I was. I said, Ed, I says, we're going to meet up at the American Legion. I says, why don't you come up and see if you'd be interested in doing it? He said, yeah, he said, I'll come up. So Eddie comes up, and there was a bunch of us there at the time, and so we selected officers. And Joe Bonaventura was the president, and they made me vice president. And so then he says, well, we got to have a treasurer. He said, well, we have no money. He says, how are we going to have a treasurer with no money? So we passed a hat for postage, just to notify different people about what we were, you know, in the process of doing. And so we raised $15. We kicked a couple dollars a piece, a whole bunch of us, right? So we turned around and gave the money to Eddie Brophy, and we made him treasurer. Big deal, man. We were going to start this deal. And then it just took off. After that, we got a lot of volunteers from town. A lot of guys were interested. A lot of guys knew Carmen and Billy. And it wasn't so much Billy at the time, it was strictly Carmen.
Right.
So I was at the Village Hall having a meeting one night, and Tony Graziano was there, sat behind me, and he's shaking me behind me. He says, I'm here for a reason. I said, well, what's the matter, Tony? He says, we do it for Carmen. He said, we should do it for Billy too. You know, and the more I thought about it, I says, yeah, you're right, Tony. So I went up and I talked to Joe Bob to a bunch of guys. I said, let's make a whole lot of meeting. Let's go confer in the other room. So we all went in the other room. Right. And I says, you know, I said, if we're doing this, I says, to justify everything, I said, why don't we do it for Billy too? Right. Do the whole thing instead of just for a memorial, which was bad wording at the time, but this is the way it was set up.
Sure.
So we're going to have a showcase. You know, we'll do it for Carmen and Billy at the same time. And then we brought it up to that meeting, and we approved of it then.
Right.
And it was Tony that wanted that done. She said, we should do it for Billy too. He deserves that for what he's went through, you know. Yeah. So, and that's how that all started.
Yeah, and it's well documented in this book by Mark Baker. In fact,
yes.
You're quoted in here on several occasions. I'll just quickly read one of the comments that you made. If I can hang on to my glasses. I guess you sold T-shirts to try to raise some money.
We did everything.
T-shirts proclaiming the mission, now a collector's item, became the most popular fundraising method. It seemed we hawked shirts everywhere, said Chuck Sgroi. We sold them at fight film nights and area promotions. Even an escape weekend raffle was held in order to bring the committee closer to its goals. That's where Eddie must get his getaway weekend packages that he gives his door prizes.
We used to go up to War Memorial. They had fights up there, and I would hawk T-shirts in the lobby, you know, outside, you know.
Right.
And I'd have $300-400 bulging out of my pocket selling T-shirts, you know. And I didn't know my element up there, where I was. I was afraid to use the men's room. I was afraid I was going to get rolled. Eddie was in with the fights. He was promoting that thing.
Right.
And I was out hawking T-shirts. And I said, I was so desperate. I was afraid to go. I was afraid somebody would hit me over the head and empty my pockets. But we had a lot of fun, I'll tell you.
So So while there have been, I mean, dozens and hundreds of people that have been involved in this whole process from showcase to Boxing Hall of Fame, you were one of the original officers. You mentioned Joe Bonaventura as president. You were the vice president, Ed Brophy as treasurer. Who was the secretary?
Charlie Bittinger.
Charlie Bittinger. Okay, and series of meetings were held, fundraising activities, and
Oh yeah, we had plenty going on. I mean, seemed like the meetings were almost weekly. We had them up to Rusty's, and there was some interesting meetings. I mean, everybody had an idea, and sometimes they didn't agree with each other, and it got pretty loud at times. You know, I had no control of it. You know, a lot of times I would hold a meeting, and I felt absolutely helpless. So I remember one night, frustrating night, I went home, and after two people that got pretty nasty, I says, well, I said, I don't want to see these arguments. You know, so I went home and I told Ada. I says, she said, how'd you make out? I said, well, I had no control of the meeting whatsoever. You know, he said, well, what seemed to be wrong? I says, you know, they mean well. Everybody's got a better idea, and nobody can agree on anything. And I says, and it gets pretty nasty. I says, you know, the holler and the shouting up there. It's a wonder Rusty even lets us, hey, keep our meetings up there because there's people at the bar. I mean, he's got customers over there, and they're listening to us and swearing and whatever. He says, well, what if I come up and just sit in? Just sit. So I'll bring my crocheting with me or read a book or something. So I says, well, are you kidding? He said, no. He said, we'll try it. So the next meeting I had Ada up there, and actually surprised them when she saw Ada walk in. And she sits in the corner in the chair, and she's either doing crochet or remember. And let me tell you, I had control of the whole meeting. We got so much accomplished that one night that I felt, well, maybe this isn't that bad at all. And I included her in just about all the meetings. And then she got involved herself, helped Eddie out with the secretarial work and stuff like that when he was at the village hall. And she's been a part of it ever since. So, and that's how I had no way of handling it. I didn't know how to handle it. I'd be honest with you, I didn't know how to handle it. You know. And
you and Ada have continued to be involved. I mean, you come to most of our meetings,
in a small way. But she, you know, she did a lot years ago. And you know, we're getting up there in age when it's getting a little more difficult with health reasons and stuff like to get involved. We've been involved for over 30 years.
Right.
And you know, great group of people. You know, I mean, you can't meet a better bunch of chair people and volunteers. Very respectful, very sharp. They get things done. Not like some of our first meetings, let me tell you. I mean, there was a hassle, and I got the videos to prove it. I go to a meeting now, and it just amazes me how these young, and I call them young people because I can call them young people.
Right.
They put things together, their minds are sharp, and they know what they want it done, and they get it done. You know, and a lot of times you say, well, if you get 3-4 years out of them, they're going to get burned out. Right. And these people are still hanging in there. So, you know, Eddie treats them right. They deserve it. Yeah. Let me tell you.
And Eddie'd be the first to admit that it's taken, you know, many people over the years from the early days with the showcase through this whole process of getting a Hall of Fame and now
you get people that do the transportation and the security, which are two of the most difficult committees, and they got things put together. You hate to lose them because a new person's going there and they're going to follow up. You know, it's just difficult. You know, especially transportation. I mean, there's a lot involved there.
Right.
You know, Charlene doing the parade. Now that she's got the hang of it, she knows who to call, when to call, and how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, you know, it just, but you wonder, how much can I get out of them? How many years can I get out of them? Because they're going to say, enough is enough, you know? Yeah. So.
I'll tell you a quick story. When I was a teenager, I was in New York City, was going to a Knicks game at the old Madison Square Garden that was kind of uptown. And I had a little time to kill before they opened the doors, and I noticed a Ring Magazine logo on a door. Yeah. They had their offices in that same block that the old Madison Square Garden was located in. And I walked through the door, and the receptionist looked at me like, who's this, you know, kid? And I said, I introduced myself, and I said, I'm from Canastota, New York. And she must have looked at me like, where? And this elderly gentleman came out of his office and he said, Canastota, New York, you must know Carmen Basilio. I said, yeah, he's our hometown hero. And he says, he was a great champ. And he says, what brings you in here? I said, well, I'm going to a Knicks game in a little while, but I just saw the Ring magazine. My father buys it all the time. And so we talked about a little conversation, and he took me on a little tour. We literally went down this narrow hallway, and he had photos on either side of boxers. Joe Louis, he had Jack Dempsey, he had all the greats from the 20s and the 30s and 40s, 50s. And I asked him where Carmen's picture was. He said, well, one day he may be up there. He says, we select a few fighters each year, and we put their picture up there, and we call it our Hall of Fame. He said, maybe someday there'll be a building, there'll be a Hall of Fame somewhere. And I mean, I never in my wildest dreams would I've ever thought it would be in Canastota, New York. And all these years later, there's a Hall of Fame in my hometown, and who's in the first induction class is Nat Fletcher. He was the founder of the magazine, editor at that time. He passed away, I think, in the early 70s, so he wasn't around when it came time to be inducted. But it was, I always think back to that little story of.
Yeah, it's very interesting that someone had not jumped onto the idea of a Boxing Hall of Fame years ago. I mean, many years ago. I mean, we've been here 25 years, but at the time we had done the showcase, there was question about, gee, there should be a Boxing Hall of Fame. I mean, the word was out, but no one really did anything about it. And so one day I'm riding around on my day off, and I said, geez, maybe we should inquire about a Boxing Hall of Fame. See if there's anything out there, it sounds promising or looks promising. So I went up to see Pete Carroll, a lawyer in town, and he was selling cars up there at his father's place. And I says, Pete, what do we about a Boxing Hall of Fame? Do you think we could inquire about a Boxing Hall of Fame if there's any proposals out there? I mean, what are the chances of doing it? And knowing Pete, he says, well, I got a connection in Albany. He said, let me give them a call right now and see what's going on. So he called somebody, I forgot who it was down there, and they said, well, there is something in the makings. He said, but if you jump on it and get in there ahead of them, maybe you got a good chance of getting it done. So we jumped right out of there. We locked the business up. And we went down to see Mike Milmo. We walked in the office of Mike Milmo, and Mike said, hey, what are you guys up to? He said, well, we got a great idea. He said, we'd like to go for the Boxing Hall of Fame. I don't ever forget what Mike said. You're nuts.
I think most people probably.
You're nuts. So I said, well, let's think about it. He says, we've got to promote it. We've got to promote it quick. He says, so let's hold a press conference at Rusty's. He says, we'll get all the TV, all the newspapers, we'll get all the connections we can get up there to get this out that we're going to go for the Boxing Hall of Fame. He says, grab all the t-shirts we couldn't sell, anything we give them to the reporters and the TV crew and whatever. He says, and I'll make up a little speech, and I'll do the sell on it. Mike says, I'll do the sell on it. So we headed up to Rusty's, and Mike did sell. I mean, he was good. I mean, he was very good. And we got t-shirts out. We had a little hors d'oeuvres to eat or whatever it was, and so we all got done. Everybody left, and Mike and the rest of us all sit at this table, and we're looking at each other. I said, well, what do we do now? We have committed ourselves to something that's much bigger than the showcase, so what are we going to do now? Yeah. That's when I backed away. I said, no, listen, you guys got the connections. You know which way to go and how to do it,
Needed some inspiration, though.
Right,
then comes the perspiration to get it done.
Yeah, but Mike did it. Yeah. A hell of a sell, I'll tell you.
Mike has a very good place, no doubt about it.
He did it, And after that, it was on the TV, in the newspapers. We're going to go for this, and so we had no way of turning back now at this point. Yeah. And it was just a matter of raising money. A lot of business guys, a lot of businessmen came in and helped us out, acquiring land, and we got this house here on Peterborough Street, and we're in there, and I'm cleaning out the cellar, and Eddie said, well, we'll take this wall out, we'll take that wall out. It's a little small house to start with, we had very small vision of what we wanted to do.
Right, sure.
So I'm looking, I said, well, if you take this wall, you may put a little display here, a little display there. The cellar's damp, we're gonna have to dry that out. So I'm delivering the mail one day, I'm down Peterborough Street and I'm looking over, and the house is gone.
Oh yeah, they went right down to the foundation.
When they started taking walls out and this and that, there was nothing left. I looked over there, all it was just a basement left, there was a foundation. I jumped in the car, I got out of work, I was getting on my route, I got on the route, and I went down, and I said, what happened? He says, well, after we got done taking this out, and that out, and this out, oh, there was nothing left, so he said, we're gonna have to start from scratch, so.
Yeah.
I said, well, you know, that did put a burden on everything, you know, to be honest with you, but I'm glad he went that way, you know, and look what we got today, you know. It's really, you know.
I can still picture the look on your face several years ago during one of the parades when you had Billy Backus on your flat rack truck. And it brought these two things together, your love of vehicles and your love of boxing. And it was the year that Carmen and Billy were the parade marshals.
Parade marshals, right.
And
Well,
Billy wanted to be on
yeah,
that
Billy
truck.
calls me up, he says, I heard you got a muck truck, which they've been long gone since the 50s. I had picked up one years ago out of the mucklands and I restored it. And I've used it a few times, the Whitelaw Parade, I used it once and a couple times, but I very seldom drive because it's 90 years old almost. I mean, you know, it's 1925, so I mean, what can you expect out of this? But he calls me up and he says, well, I want to ride on your muck truck. Or he remembers it being next door to his grandmother, so he remembers what it used to look like.
Right.
I said, well, if I can get it running, Billy, I said, we'll try it. I said, we'll keep our fingers crossed. So when I pulled up to load him up, he looks out and he looks at this thing and I had a bundle of crates on the back. You know, I mean, you're not riding on a muck truck.
It was neat.
It was neat, you know, down there. And sure enough, well, Betsy made it through the parade route.
That's it.
But you know, of all of them, you know, he's sitting on that bundle of crates there in his suit. Right in the parade, you know, it's a little corny, but you know, we had a lot of fun.
Yeah,
we had a lot of laughs.
absolutely.
You know, boy, and I was
Absolutely.
holding my breath. I said,
Yeah.
oh, geez, get me through this route.
Well, I'd like to thank our videographer, Ellen Dunbar.
Very nice.
She's sat through our stories
I
now
know.
for God knows how long. And Chuck, I'd like to thank you
Oh, it
for
was a
sharing your
pleasure.
stories and for all that you've done for this community.
Well, thank you very much.
A lot of service, whether it be at the postal
Uh,
office or Canastota Boxing Hall of Fame.
Very good, thank you.
Major contributions.
Very good.
Appreciate it. Thank you.